Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture. I'm coming to you live today from the Palace of Versailles, right outside of Paris, France. And like myself, today's lecture will be looking at halls of power in Europe. We're going to be going through and seeing how Europe is changing here in the 17th century. And we're going to be seeing how the development of new forms of power and new forms of government really begin to move the continent forward and begin to change not only the continent but also its colonies and the outside world. So we'll be looking at the different forms of government of absolutism and constitutionalism. We'll be looking at the Enlightenment. And then finally, we'll be looking at Central and Eastern Europe to see how they are sort of reacting to these changes that are going on around them. So without further ado, I'll get started with the lecture, and I'm going to go check out this solid gold candelabra. So here we are going back to Europe, looking at the late 1500s, early 1600s in Europe. Right now, Spain basically rules overseas trade. Spain controls not only most of the Iberian Peninsula, they also control the uh, island nation of Sardinia, Sicily, and the southern part of Italy, as well as the Netherlands. So Spain is pretty much in control of overseas trade and has the strongest grip on the New World. However, during this time, you do see England gaining a lot of power, especially in the North Atlantic, and then going through and beginning to gain some power in Asia, and has a foothold in India as well. France, however, at this time is looking at this sort of odd period in their history as they are locked in these religious wars that aren't really allowing France to really look outside of its own borders. Because of this, England and Spain are pretty much ruling over who will be in charge of the trade in with the New World, and France is going to have to play catch up in that regard. And when it comes to the New World really has changed the game as far as colonialism and as far as empire building goes, because now you're looking at exploring new places, controlling new places. Here we have one of the first maps of the New World, and you could see that there is this missing portion here of what would be the Southwest, and you kind of see this idea of the island that would become Baja California, the island of California, and then pretty much here you see that people still think it's India. That this is a an area that is known now as the West Indies. So you're exploring these new places, you're finding new people, and you are really looking at new ways to look at what is a person. And this is something that we'll really get into whenever we look at the colonists at this time, is what it means to be a person. Because the colonies are really making definitions of rule unclear, and definitions of humanity are beginning to evolve at this time. What is a person, who is a person, what rights do people have, and also what are these definitions of ruling. What is a king who is never seen, and what rights does one have to rule? So these ideas are beginning to be spoken and thought of by intellectuals, and pretty soon they'll spread out to the regular people. And so we look here at the map of Europe during this time. And as you can see, Europe here is beginning to take shape The way that we look at Europe is the way that we know Europe um, is beginning to take become much more clear, as you could see things like this the Holy Roman Empire beginning to look more like modern day Germany, France beginning to look like the France that we know, in England, Ireland, and Scotland becoming much more combined, and some of these other uh, Western, or excuse me, Eastern European nations beginning to be absorbed by things like the new Russian state, and beginning to be absorbed by the German Confederation. And so our lecture today is really going to be focusing on the two main ways that these developing nations begin to govern themselves. We'll be looking at absolutism and constitutionalism. And we'll go much more in depth in this in class, but I wanted to give you this sort of overview at some of the things that we're going to be looking at. When it comes to absolutism, we're going to be looking at primarily the countries of Spain and France, and in these two countries, you see that the power is almost completely in the hands of the monarch. And in these countries, under absolutism, the ruler answers to no man. However, the ruler still must respect God and nature. So there is something that still rules over the sovereign, and that is both the will of God and the natural order. And part of this natural order means having children, especially having male heirs. Under absolutism, you have this financial system known as mercantilism. And under mercantilism, just broadly, there is this idea that resources are finite, and that the state must really be in control of these resources and must protect these resources. So state um, there's a lot of state interference in commerce, and a lot of this is in the form of taxes and high tariffs. And so you have a lot of restrictions on trade when it comes to the colonies under mercantilism. So you're trying to protect your resources, trying to gain more finite resources. You're trying to govern over a colony that's far away. So because of this, you need to have very strong military. You have to have very high military spending. And so under an absolutist government, you have a very strong monarch and a very closed system of trade, and a closed economic system. Under constitutionalism, we'll be looking mainly at the country of England, and under constitutionalism, the power is split between the monarch and the legislatures. There's usually a written down constitution that lays out the way that not only power is shared, but also how power is wielded by the different branches of this government. So, under these constitutions, you have a lot of laying down of who does what between the monarch and the legislature. And under constitutionalism, the law applies to all, because all of these rules, all of the laws and the ability to rule lies within a contract, that the people have a contract with the rulers, and that the rulers have a contract with the representatives of the people. So the legislature sort of acts as that representative of the people. And unlike absolutism, there is a much freer form of um, a freer economic system that comes to be known as capitalism. And this is much more of a free market ideology where the state shouldn't interfere, and there's a lot of independence among the different companies, or the different people that are making and maintaining this sort of this sort of economic form, and so we see a lot more inter international trade and a lot less dependence on the state, but still there is dependence on the state. And so, like I said, we're going to be looking at the way that absolutism functions in these two countries that we're looking at. We're going to be looking at this pretty quickly, sort of a broad overview that we'll really hammer down into in our class in our class session this week. But looking at the background of absolutism, you see a clear line of this absolute power going back through European history. The origins of absolutism come from this idea of a divine right. And we talked about this whenever we looked at China, how they had that mandate of heaven, that there was a right to rule given from the ancestors of the heavens, and Europe has their own version of that in the divine right of kings, which is this God-given right to rule. So there is this precedence that the people that it's not really the people that give power; it is God above that is ordaining these kings as rightful rulers. You also have this idea that people need a ruler, and a lot of philosophers are going to talk about this during the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment as well. The fact that people need a ruler, just like some um, uh, philosophers like Thomas Hobbes is going to talk about that people are selfish, people are violent, and a strong ruler basically prevents anarchy. So having a very strong ruler, having a very strong government basically keeps us from descending into a state of nature, into a state of backwardness, and a strong ruler is the only thing that keeps humanity from going backwards into anarchy. You also have this idea of religious authority, especially the church. The church definitely wants strong rulers. The church doesn't want rulers that are not able to get as much money to them, that are not able to convert as much souls to them, and that have to answer to other people other than the Pope or other than the Church. So the religious authority of absolutism comes from this idea that the Church needs strong rulers. Church needs obedient rulers as well. So they can be strong up to a point, but at some point they have to be obedient to the Church. Now, of course, there is strong historical precedents for this idea of absolutism, going back to the idea of the Roman emperor, where there was one man who was in charge of an entire empire, even though this is sort of an idea that's lost in time, because anyone that took the history 110 knows that the oftentimes Rome was ruled by more than one man. There was often two rulers, three rulers, even up to five or seven rulers that made up the executive branch in historic Rome. But because of Caesar, because of the early emperors, the very first of these Justinian leaders, um, you have this idea of a single strong ruler that led Rome, that moved Rome forward. Although that wasn't always the case, that is the popular myth, and that is the history that is given, and that is the excuse that is given for absolutism. And really, a lot of this absolutism goes back to Renaissance ideals, bringing out the old ways of doing things, recapturing the glory of Rome, bringing back a new what was old is new again when it comes to governing. Remember how great Rome was? Let's make Europe great again. Let's go back to that era where one man ruled half of the world. So these are the origins of absolutism. This is the way that absolutism develops in Europe, and these are some of the justifications that are later used whenever these rulers begin to take over and completely run the country. So first, we're going to be looking at Spanish absolutism, and we're going to be looking at the way that Spanish absolutism develops and the way that it eventually crashes. The very first of these absolute Spanish kings was King Charles V. At one point, he was the most powerful man of the world because he was the King of Spain and he was the Holy Roman Emperor. King Charles the Fifth is one of the most um, uh, well liked and one of the most well celebrated men in Spanish history and even throughout Latin America. A lot of people know who Carlo Quinto is, especially through his candy bar that's named after him. However, he was not a very popular king. He was foreign born and raised, and he was actually Flemish, born and raised, and which is the area here in what is now Belgium, but he came in from Brussels from Flanders, excuse me, and he put his men in charge, got rid of all the previous rulers that were there, previous nobility, and brought in his own men. And pretty soon you have open rebellion. In 1520, you see the beginning of rebellion, which is stamped out in 1520, and this leads to reforms. Uh, Charles V begins to make amends with the nobility and with the people, respects the wishes of his people, and begins to put in people that are native to Spain in charge, and then pretty much giving in to a lot of the demands of the people. Um, Towards the end of his life, he's actually going to abdicate both thrones of the Holy Roman Empire and Spain as he gets much older. In 1556, he's going to split the Holy Roman Empire from Spain, and so here will be the Holy Roman Empire, and he will give the crown of Spain to King Philip II of Spain, who will basically centralize power and will begin to control most of the Iberian Peninsula, especially in 1580 when he conquers Portugal and becomes the new sovereign of Portugal, and eventually will create the largest empire in history up to this point, an empire that contains all of the Spanish viceroyalties, and then also um, now controls Brazil, controls uh, ports throughout Africa and India, and controls most of the Spice Islands and the Philippines in Southeast Asia. So this large empire will still not have enough money. Wars of conquest are going to take their toll. He is going to become indebted to a lot of people, and one of the plans is for him to marry marry the new Queen of England. However, this marriage doesn't go through, as Mary actually is arrested and executed by her sister Elizabeth I. And because of this, there is this planned invasion of England and what is known as the War of the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada consisted of 130 ships with 20,000 soldiers aboard and 2,500 cannons and other large munitions as well. So these were very, very heavy ships. known as galleons, and these were basically only only made for war. They were gigantic. They were very hard to move around, however, and the English pretty much knew this. The English had a lot faster ships. The English had the home field advantage, if you will. But the English also had a secret up their sleeves. They had privateers or pirates. Privateers were basically pirates that were told by the British government, or excuse me, English government at this time, that if they joined the fight against the Spanish, that their crimes would be forgiven, and they could plunder as many Spanish ships as they wanted, as long as they left English ships alone. And so the privateers would do that. And then once there was war in 1588, the privateers joined with the English Navy, and basically were used to fighting against Spanish galleons, and were invaluable in the effort against the Spanish. The Spanish eventually end up losing the Wars of the Armada, and we'll get more into this in our class. But the war does not go well. Spain is defeated, and eventually the dominance of uh, Spain diminishes throughout the Atlantic. You have the Dutch declaring independence from Spain, and then you have the basically Spain ceding control of the Atlantic, and the English Navy reigns throughout the Atlantic, and you start seeing colonies in North America spring up much faster after the fall of the Armada, and with the aftermath of that, pretty much after 1600 is when you really see the rise of all of the colonies on the east coast of North America, because England basically controls most of the North Atlantic, and really a lot of the Central Atlantic as well. The Spanish economy slows to a crawl. Trade keeps Spain afloat, but expansion stagnates, and these colonies basically become work camps. And you need a lot more workers, so a lot more slaves are imported. The mines in Mexico and Ecuador, what is now Ecuador and Peru, are worked double and triple time, and so everybody is being used to get silver and other precious metals for the Spanish crown, and because of that, you can't really expand their territory, and so this is why the border of what is now Texas is pretty much where the Spanish um, frontier ends. They don't continue to move up. They don't take advantage of the Mississippi. They don't really move into the east coast of what will become the United States, because they are so busy using every available able-bodied man to get get precious metals to keep them out of debt. And so you have a very slow economy, no expansion, and colonies being asked to work a lot harder. And so, really, after the defeat of the Spanish Armada and the battles in the North Atlantic, you will see Spain no longer really be a force in world affairs. Their colonies will be important. The goods coming out of the colonies will be important. The transformation that happens within the colonies will be important. But as far as world affairs, Spain takes a secondary position behind other European forces. And we'll still talk a little bit about Spain from here move forward, but they won't be a major focus of our lectures anymore. What will be a major focus, however, is France. The French government will come out a little bit better than the Spanish do, well, a lot better, at least for a while. But French absolutism has its origins in the religious wars of the 16th century. So the religious wars in France begin about 1569. If you remember from our first lecture, the Reformation begins around 1517, and so it takes a little over 50 years for the religious wars to really take hold in France. And when they do, however, they are um, these huge battles between what's known as Huguenots and Catholics. So between Calvinist forces and Catholic forces vying for control of the Kingdom of France. One of the major um, events during this is the Bartholomew's Day massacre that happened August 24th, 1572. And in this event, basically, there was this rumor going around that Calvinists or the Huguenots were going around and killing Catholics in the streets, decapitating them, and basically uh, burning down their homes and basically terrorizing Catholics throughout France. How this rumor started, no one really knows, but in retaliation for this rumor, Catholics begin throughout France begin to um, basically massacre Huguenots, do everything that Huguenots were being rumored to do. The Catholics actually do to Huguenots. They basically turn the rivers in major French cities red with the blood of the killed Huguenots, and there's between somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000 were killed uh, in the few days of fighting and terror that came through the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. So events like this are really limiting the way that France can move forward. They don't really have a strong central power, and they have all of these different wars going on for religious control. And it's not until 1589, when you have the ascension of Henry IV to the throne, that you are able to really get a strong unified France. Henry the Fourth is a huge no leader, and Henri actually has the backing of Queen Elizabeth in England, as giving Henri um, a lot of material support and munition support. And so, as a Huguenot leader, he's rallying people around him, but he decides to convert to Catholicism, which basically infuriates Elizabeth, and England and France cut off friendly relations after this. So he converts to Catholicism in order to improve his position politically. There's a lot stronger Catholic leaders, and he also gets the backing of the Pope. And with the downfall of Spain as the preeminent Catholic force, the Pope is much friendlier to France because they have a lot of what the Catholic Church needs, mainly people and money. And so he converts to Catholicism, and because he was a Huguenot, he's able to get the Huguenots to agree to a ceasefire, and begins to expand his empire out, actually sending people to the New World to explore the northernmost part of the new continent, landing and having his men land in Quebec in 1604. And so Henri is expanding his power base and expanding the peace throughout France. However, this does not last, as he is assassinated on May 14th, 1610, in front of his family. He's out. He's one of those men of the people type leaders, and he's out in an open carriage when a Huguenot assassin runs up to him and stabs him to death. And after that, his son uh, takes the throne, and you have the beginning of the Louis coming in. His son Louis the 13th actually uh, takes over in 1610, but he's underage, and so his mother, who we'll talk about more in class, comes is basically his regent. He comes into full power in 1624 and brings in a very strong leader, very strong second in command, Cardinal Richelieu, who has enormous power and actually helps Louis the 13th consolidate and grow his power. Uh, Richelieu is going to get Louis to agree to ally with Protestants in the 30 Years' War. In 1635, they really jump into the 30 Years' War, and the war is over within a decade. He repeals some of the privileges that the Huguenots um, were given, such as the ability to raise an army. This basically goes away, and only the king can raise an army in France. And he basically continues what his father Henri did, expanding the power of the French crown and expanding his control over the country. Now, Louis and Richelieu will both die within months of each other, as all good couples do, in 1642, and that is when Louis the 14th will take charge. Louis the 14th, known as Le Roi Soleil, or the Sun King. He's most famous for his quote, L'état c'est moi, which means the state is I, or I am the state. He is the government. He is that which is in charge. And so you see this great march towards a stronger monarch, a more absolute monarch. You have him bring aboard his own second in command, who is not as well liked as Richelieu, and the fact that Louis the 14th is consolidating power at a quicker level leads to a rebellion by the nobility known as the Fronde or Le Fronde, which lasts from 1648 to 1653. And this rebellion basically implodes because the um, the rebels can't agree who will be in charge, and so because of this, it weakens the rebels are weakened, and the loyalists are able to completely take control of the situation and defeat the rebels. And basically, what this shows is that only an absolute monarch can control the peace in Europe. You need to have a very strong iron fist to control the people in France. And so Louis the 4th will take that control. He will consolidate power and move from the imperial palace in France and build to a new palace, which he builds on the outside of Paris, known as Versailles. And we'll take a closer look at this palace in our class session. And with this movement to Versailles, you have the beginning of one king, one law, and one faith. They are all intertwined. The king, the law, and faith are all intertwined. Nobles are kept from office, and only people loyal to Louis are able to have any real power in France. And religious tolerance is basically repealed. So you have this one king, an absolute king, one law, the law of what Louis says, and one faith, this Catholic faith. And so as we leave France, they have a very strong monarch, and you start seeing the beginning of people resenting this very strong monarch.